off again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot see.
Hi, welcome along to Steve Wraith's True Crime Podcast. Delighted to say I'm joined by Lennox Rodgers, who is the author of this wonderful book, Breaking Better. And he's also the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of the charity Refocused project. We'll look at that a little bit later. But welcome, Lennox. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Steve, for having me on. It's a real honor. Thank you.
No, great to have you on, my friend, as well. And as part of the True Crime podcast, I just thought, it would be great to have you on. Big thanks to Nick and Katie for pointing you in my direction. And I just want to start at the beginning, like I do on all of these True Crime podcasts. Tell us a little bit about, where you were born, where you grew up, Lennox.
Yeah, I was born in Oxford. I'm the only son. I've got 7 sisters older than me, and my family's from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in the Caribbean. But when I was born, they took me back over to the Caribbean for a few years and then brought me back again. So I grew up in the early 60s and 70s. In Oxford, and it was quite a racist time then, because all around where I lived was gangs, so I grew up around gangs, and there was not many people of colour around at that time, so it's very difficult. So my early childhood was full of racism, where every time I went to school, someone, a young white kid, would stand in the middle of the playground every morning and shout blacks against whites. And then there'd be like 7 or 8 of us against the rest of the school. It was only some of the Scottish and Irish kids that came on our side, and we had teachers in the windows placing bets on who would win and all sorts of things there. So that was every morning, and there would be gangs waiting for us when school finished to beat us up. And so that was my life. We used to have to plan our route if we wanted to go to the shops. We knew where the gangs were, and we used to try and go through different alleys and parks to get to the shops. And otherwise they chase you, and if they catch you, they beat you up. So
did you feel like fighting back? Could you fight back, Lennox, or was there just too many of them?
We were outnumbered all the time, and we tried to fight back. Initially I was a bit naive because I didn't know sometimes that they were taking the mickey out of me. So when they used to say things like nigger matter, what I mind, you'll be all white in the morning, I used to actually think I would be white in the morning. Wake up and I was still the same colour. And my friends had to tell me, look, Len, they're taking the mick, and but we did fight back. We weren't, really good fighters or anything like that. And it was just street fight. Everybody fought with their fists back in the day. There's only some gangs and football firms that fought with weapons. But we had gangs like skinhead gangs. We had Teddy Boy mods, different gangs like that. But all over Oxford, there were what they called boot boys back then. And they were just homemade gangs from different areas. So where you have today in London areas and other big cities, postcode gangs, we had boot boys that managed their own areas, so yeah, it was really a difficult time being faced with that every day. And in the community, getting racial abuse. Yeah, so it's quite tough.
I read up on your story, and obviously, as well as the the racial abuse, the physical abuse, the violence, there was also sexual abuse as well. I mean, if you don't want to talk about that, please don't. But I mean, to hear that as as a man who, I consider I had a really good upbringing. I just, it doesn't bear thinking about what somebody like yourself must have gone through at such a young age.
Yeah, well, it's seemingly quite common that in some family circles you get sexually abused. I was sexually abused by my godfather, and then raped by him at the age of 13. But it was an era where kids need to be seen and not heard, so it was very difficult in my family to be believed. I tried to tell my sisters, and they didn't believe me. But yeah, it was very difficult being sexually abused like that. I used to get sent to my godfather's house every Saturday to take bread and cakes that my mother had baked, and whilst his wife and 2 daughters were in the house, he would sexually abuse me. He would sit next to me on the sofa and try rubbing up my leg and to my groin, and I would keep moving away until there was nowhere to move, and often we'd get interrupted. He would send his daughters out of the room, and I had to endure that every week, and it was really a difficult time as well, faced with the racism and that. But I got raped after being put in care and running away, because he was a groomer as well. So sometimes he was nice to you, and I was in a family where it was very strict, and they wanted you to be seen and not heard. They wanted you to pick up a book and keep yourself quiet, and so the communication, there wasn't the "how was your day at school" sort of communication. And this guy, he actually talked to me, took the time to talk to me, and in his words, he says, because I asked him, why are you doing this, and he says, well, I love you 2 ways, because I said, why can't you love me as a father? And I love you as a father, I love you another way. And it was really uncomfortable. I hated it. I couldn't do nothing about it. I ran away from a secure children's home, and I wanted to get some money to stay on the run. And funnily enough, the person I ran away with was a Geordie, and he was a great he was a great guy, and so I thought that we could get some money from him, and my Geordie friend, he after he helped me to get back to my godfather's house, he decided that he had other places he was going to go. I went in there, and he took full advantage of me and my situation. And I remember the experience. It was just very painful, and it's just you know, I could remember everything. I don't know how much to say on
No,
the
I
show,
think
but
I think you painted the, you know, a very grim picture. I mean, you know, to be able to sit here and have a conversation with you, Lennox, I think shows the measure of the man, because ultimately, you know, as we'll find out, you did manage to, you know, eventually turn your life around. But, you know, you went through, you know, hell as a child. There's no doubt about that. You went through the care system, which I think I've heard on this show many times when I've interviewed lots of people, that it's failed so many youngsters back in our time. I mean, I'm you know, I'm talking about the 60s and 70s in particular, of, you know, where systematic failures have resulted in, you know, kids' lives being ruined. You were kicked out of school. You know, did you leave school with any qualifications at all?
I eventually, because the first time I took my CSE exams, or supposed to, it had all A's on the back of it, you know. Initially, when my mum saw that, she thought I had been a first-class student, and then she read that A was for absent. I couldn't get away fast enough. But I eventually took some exams again, and I did carpentry and joinery, geography, maths and English, and I didn't get better than a C grade in those. But I liked the carpentry and joinery. I stayed on at school because I wanted to join the army. I wanted to join the REME and be a mechanical engineering. So, you know, the school I was at was an approved school, residential, and it had specialist teachers that were excellent. So I did pretty well. But when I went to take the test at the army, I think I scored 75 out of 100. And they told me you need 80 plus to join the REME. And they said, try again in 6 months. Really what they should have said, you've got enough to go into the transport regiment, go in there, learn to drive everything, and then try and get transferred to the REME. But I wasn't advised like that. And the second time I took my test, my scores were lower. So in the end, I gave up and got work in civilian life. And as time went on, I got involved in gangs because I tried to get retribution for the bullying at school in my local area. I went and found some of these people that bullied me and were racist to me and beat them up.
I mean, obviously, the dream of being in the army and not being advised in the right way, you know, leading to you leaving. I mean, you know, you say you went into work, but you know, tell us about that. I mean, what other work did you try to get involved in, and why don't you think, you know, that worked out for you?
Well, it was very hard not having good qualifications to secure a good job. And so you had these government schemes that offered school leavers and other unemployed people training. And I think we used to get about £23.50 at one stage with one of the schemes. Because it was so hard to secure a job, you know, or an apprenticeship, it was very hard. So I did these government schemes, labouring, and tried to learn a trade that way. But it didn't work out because I was still dealing with my family. I was living with my family, and we didn't get on, and there was a clash. And so I decided to leave home, and I went up to Birmingham, but so trying to get another job in civilian life didn't work out that way. I think I had a few jobs. I worked for a furniture place, which allowed me discount on furniture, and my parents were going back to the Caribbean for good, and so they took advantage of me working at this furniture shop, and managed to send a lot of furniture back home for their house. We didn't get on, and it was very hard to keep a job when home life was so difficult. It was a struggle. But I was also getting hassle from some people at work and in the community, and I used to take initially a lot of crap from people, but I decided I'm not going to do that anymore, and I started fighting back, and then at one stage people started saying to me that people are not fighting with their hands anymore, and they were using knives, and so I picked up a knife, and I started believing what the word on the street was, and I decided I'd stab people, and I wasn't afraid of the consequences, and so if anybody upset me, I'd let them have it. And word got around about my violence, and I was headhunted by a drug dealing gang, a local drug dealing gang. They were trying to control the whole of Oxford, and there was a few dealers that they hadn't been able to win over, but they had a group of guys who were like enforcers for them, because they used to give out drugs to other gangs, and if they didn't pay, these few guys would go and try and get the money back. But they went and did a robbery of another drug dealer, and they went into a townhouse with imitation firearms to rob a drug dealer, and he was on the top floor. And when they burst into his room with their imitation firearms, he just sat there calmly and put his hand behind the sofa and pulled out a real firearm. And they jumped out of the third floor window and broke arms and legs. So they were out of action. So it was quite timely for this gang. They asked me to join, and I became their enforcer. And so they would send me on suicide missions, go to Brixton, they give me a few grand to buy some kilos of cannabis. There would be gangs outside waiting to rob me, and I would come back with the goods. And there were people that owed them money, and I would have to go and get it back, and I always came back with the money. Never didn't return and not get the money or whatever they asked me to do, and which led me to being headhunted by this organised crime gang in London. We used to go to a pub which was nicknamed a labour exchange, because criminals were able to get jobs that come out of prison, and they'd get jobs doing burglaries and various other crimes. And this guy, this local guy who was part of this organised crime gang in London, wanted to introduce me to some of the organised crime gangs. So I went with him to Marylebone, and in this posh bar, and introduced me to this gang. They recruited me. My mentor lived at the back of Oxford Street. He owned a jeweller's shop. He was chauffeur driven. I met bankers. I met other business people. There were solicitors. As I got to know the gang and as they got to trust me, I got to find out there were police involved and MPs and East End gangsters, some of whom were around for the craze. So it was quite a big network of people who, they had people in all sorts of businesses and things. I did a spate of armed robberies for them. They had someone in the bank who would say, we've got a guy coming from this particular business on a Tuesday afternoon, bringing X amount of grands, and I would find a blind spot and take his money off him, and I did a lot of that for this gang. They gave me jobs. They even watched me committing these crimes because they wanted to see how good I was, and so they would stand at a safe place, and I would rob whoever and beat them and take their money, and then contact them later and we'd meet up, and I'd get the majority of it. They only wanted X amount, but they guided me like that. Yeah.
I mean, from your perspective, you must have clearly knew you were doing wrong. But I mean, did you have any conscience? Did you sleep well at night?
Yeah, well, I didn't sleep well at night because I carried a lot of baggage.
Of course, from your past.
Yeah, I was tormented day and night. But what I had to do, because I found it difficult, especially in the early years, it was, having a girlfriend who's got kids for someone else and you're living with them. It was difficult to be in a family setting and then go and do an armed robbery where you're shoving a gun in someone's face and effing and blinding at them. Gives the money or else I'll blow your face off. It was very difficult to come from playing with the kids on the floor in the lounge to that scenario. So every time I knew I was going to do a violent crime, I had to take 3-4 hours out, and I'd go jogging. I'd prepare my mind, because I think I can't afford to get caught. I don't want to be sat in the cell wishing I did this and wishing I did that. I was going to make sure I get what it was I was going after, but mentally I had to prepare my mind to do that, and I suppose as for sleeping at night, smoking cannabis and drinking rum, that kind of was a good nightcap. I smoked cannabis like cigarettes. I worked for drug dealers as well, so easy access to an unlimited supply of drugs, whilst I carried this baggage. But I think it was very important that I found it very hard to just turn this evil person on who was going to commit these violent crimes after having fun with the kids. I just couldn't. I had to take some time out and get my mind into, right, I'm going to be violent. I'm going to rage. I'm going to let this rage out.
With crime, of course, comes consequences. Prison and being locked up, being deprived of your liberty is what what happens. And tell us about your first trip to prison. I mean, again, was that a deterrent to you?
Well, I hoped it would be. You know, it was horrible, my first time in prison, and scary. And I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to get out of prison. Prisoners would say things like, "You're going to get life," and it was, you know, it was a scary time. I got forced to sell drugs, to move drugs around in there for another drug dealer, because I had a job as a cleaner at one stage. So my first time in, I remember my first night. You know, I fell asleep and I woke up, and I thought I was at home, and I got up to make a cup of tea, walked into the wall. But I was sharing a cell with a guy, and prisoners used to have sex with their mattress. They'd put a hole in and stick their penis through it, or they'd put a hole in the pillow and do the same. You know, and I remember having to get my bed covers and hold them up because this guy was rocking me to sleep. But he only done it that time. I mean, it was scary because I couldn't let him keep doing that to me. It stirred up bad things, and so he stopped after that. But I got to realise that a lot of prisoners did that, you know. And if you were someone who couldn't do anything about it, then you know you had to suffer. And we didn't have toilets in the cells, so we had like buckets where you did your business, and if you wanted to do a number two after the doors are locked, you put some newspaper down. If you don't want to do it in your bucket, and do it on the newspaper, wrap it up and throw it out the window. They were called ship parcels. So it was, you know, you got a shower once a week. Every time you emptied your buckets in these, you know, communal ablutions, the stench was so bad, officers would have to stand at the other end of the landing. You know, and it was very violent. You know, people would come up behind you and stab you or smash you in the head with something. There was a lot of violence. You know, I saw a lot of violence, you know, during my first time in prison and throughout my 21 years of going in and out of prison and 16 different prisons. It was crazy, but you had to learn to survive in that environment. And I ended up not having anything to lose. I became a person that would, you know, seriously harm someone, even to death, to survive. For me, it became like it's kill or be killed. If they die, they die, and you have to suffer the consequences. I watched, you know, two guys put these PP9 batteries in socks and beat someone, you know, in their head with it because they ripped them off on a drug deal. I've seen a man take a razor out of his pocket and turn another man's face into a jigsaw puzzle. I've watched people put sugar in jugs of scalding hot water and throwing that in people's faces. I had to make a knife myself, but because I worked in the mailbag shop, I managed to steal one of these machine needles that was thick and strong and melt it into the end of a toothbrush and, you know, prepared to jab it in someone's eye, you have to be prepared to commit serious acts of violence to survive. You know, because the kind of people you lived with, they were very violent too. You know, and they had committed murders, serious armed robberies with serious acts of violence. There were people, I mean, guys that had crucified another man and nailed him to the floorboards and tortured him, you know, to death. It's, you know, so living with those types of people, carrying my baggage, you know, I was prepared to do anything to survive.
Which were the worst prisons for you that you'd been in?
One of them was Dartmoor prison. When I first went there, they were still taking groups of men up on the quarries to smash rocks. That was your job. You smash big rocks into little rocks, and it had a serious amount of men that had mental health issues. Man that ate his own excrement and drank his own urine. You know, people that talk to themselves. I saw a lot of mental health issues. The officers were racist to a black guy who was a boxer, and one day he couldn't take no more, and when the officer came to his cell, he pulled him in and shut the door and beat the crap out of him. But then he never saw the black guy again. He disappeared. You know, so Dartmoor for me was one of the worst. Grendon prison was another worst one, because the judge recommended, after I had stuck a knife up someone's backside who tried to rape me when I was drunk and under the influence of cannabis, despite my drink. I stuck a knife up his backside because he triggered off that abuse and the rage that I felt from that. So they sent me to Dartmoor, but they recommended that I have therapy. And so they moved me from Dartmoor to Grendon, which is a therapeutic prison. And the horror stories, you having to sit on a group and listen to men share about their crimes, and people would get off their chairs and attack people. But obviously if you do that, you get removed from that prison back to a secure prison. But you know, you weren't separated from sex offenders. So I was doing therapy with rapists and child sex offenders, people that had done horrific crimes to babies, and also people that were crazy, that had killed and raped a young girl and then burnt her and then raped her again when she was dead, all that kind of craziness. There was a guy who was a murderer, and he shaved his legs, he wore makeup, and he used to wolf whistle after men. And I said to the officer, I can't have him do that to me. And the officer said, he won't do that to you. And I was so thankful. But yeah, so he didn't. But there were guys having sex in the showers, you know, and it was just crazy. There were some really horrible, dangerous people that I had to have therapy with, and you know, it was really weird that a man who was like my abuser was trying to tell me that, you know, he knows what that kind of person is like because he did it, and he was trying to help me not to blame myself. But yeah, so Grendon for me and Dartmoor, was bad. Also, Strange Ways was pretty bad, because there was a north and south divide. I went to ask an officer about when I can go to the gym. He turned around to me, he said, "You ask me anything again, Lennox, you southern bastard." And he spoke to me like that, and I thought, all right, okay. But yeah, they were like that. But I found up north the people were nicer than down south. People talk to you a bit more up north, and even as bad as Strange Ways were, there were people that helped you out. I was locked up with a really nice guy from Salford, and but so those were my three worst ones.
Yeah. I mean, just talking about Strangers, I've heard so many stories about it from inmates who've been in there, and it's always the same. It's always the same story. It just seems that they had a certain type of attitude, those particular prison officers there in that particular time scale, and they're legendary. They've almost become legendary. But yeah, I mean, this podcast that I do, the True Crime Podcast, generally has a positive feeling, and this one is no different. And despite the fact that you had such a horrendous start in life, and then ultimately went down that path of crime and violence, which led to to 2 decades going in and out of, I think it was 16 different prisons. It all came to a head, didn't it? You ended up homeless on the streets of London.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, gosh. I was homeless for a while because I was up and down the country, Sheffield, Manchester. I was in Cambridge and Cambridgeshire. I was in Hastings and various places, and ended up homeless. I started off homeless with a lot of baggage, and by the time I hit London, I had nothing. I had to get rid of it all, and it just became so heavy to carry around, And I was my body started to shut down in the winter. I thought I'm going to die. I felt as if I was going to die on the streets, and I thought I don't want to do that. And so I remembered that the judge had told me, "You stab anyone else and I'll send you to prison for life." And I didn't care about that. I thought, well, that's got to be better than being out here. And so I wanted to, pick a fight with someone. And I didn't have a knife. I had a Brador. I thought I could do some damage with that. But when walking down Oxford Street, it's just full of people and families, and I thought, I can't stab anyone in front of some of these kids and these families. It traumatise them. So it took me a week to find a man at night on his own that I could pick a fight with, and that's what I did. And he was at the cash point, and I asked him for some spare change, and then whacked him with my Brador. But the funny, it just didn't. I was standing to the right of him, and my arm came up the other side of him, on his left side, and sort of just made a mark across his face. But he dropped his wallet and screamed. And for a moment, I thought, oh, I could pick his wallet up, but I didn't, Anyway, I should have stayed there, knowing that the police would come, because I wanted to get myself locked up. But instinct, I ended up running, and while I was running, thinking I'll just go to the end of this road and go around that corner, I noticed that he was running in the same direction as me. We were like two joggers running together for a brief moment. And he looked at me, I looked at him, he screamed and ran the other way. And so I went round this corner and I saw an alley and I ran into the alley. But it was so dark in there, I couldn't even see my own hands in front of me. I had to feel the walls, sort of lean on one side and then lean on the other to see if that was a wall and shuffle. I couldn't take big steps. I just shuffled along until I went round a corner, bumped into some industrial bins and sat between the bins. And the next things that happened, that was weird. You'd have to read the book to see that. It was a weird, I've never ever in my life experienced anything like that. But what happened to me in that alley, it made me change my life, and I ended up handing myself into the police. Imagine that experience. It made me decide I'm going to do something right. I'm going to tell the police what I did. And I had 2 6-foot-odd detectives interview me, and they wanted to know my story. And I've never experienced this before, that one of these men ran out of the interview room to get tissues for themselves. They were crying. And they decided they wanted to get me the best help. And I didn't care. I wanted to go to prison. I'd injured myself being homeless by trying to sleep standing up and falling over on my face a few times. It's ridiculous. They got me a really good solicitor. But I just told them the truth. I even wrote a letter to the judge and told the judge that I stabbed this guy. You need to throw the book at me, throw the key away. And I saw him with my letter when I went to get sentenced. And, he decided not to give me a life sentence, but to give me 3 years. I think, or 3 years and 6 months. I got 6 months free for thinking about robbing the guy of his wallet. And I had a guy who was the leader, he's the ex-leader of a Hell's Angel chapter. Who had turned his life around, and he used to visit me every day in Wandsworth. And so he helped me, and I had some counselling and stuff in there as well. He helped me, continue that change. But that experience, it was like being in the Twilight Zone. You'd have to be there to
to understand. And people can find out what happened in that alley through this book, Breaking Better, by Lennox Rodgers. Now, having had that second chance and that epiphany really in your life, you then went on to found what has become one of the most important things, not just in your life, but many other people's life, and that is the charity,
of course,
the Refocused project. Tell us about that, please, Lennox.
Yeah, when I came out of prison, several months later, I was asked by 2 youth workers to come and talk to a local Southeast London gang that were about 40 strong. They wanted to know what prison was like. So I went with them, and there were all these gang members and girls in this gang, and we was in this hall, and I talked to them for 2 hours. They were a noisy lot, but when I started telling them things about what prison was like, you could hear a pin drop, and it freaked them out. they wanted me to stay longer, but like I had a tag, so I had to go home. But the impact of my sharing my lived experience made some of them decide that they didn't want to be in the gang. They didn't want to suffer the consequences of some of the things, because they used knives, they robbed people, they did drug dealing and that. They had gang fights with other gangs from other parts of Southeast London. And I think they were able to get hold of a gun as well. So, they were a pretty violent group. And the girls revealed that they had been sexually abused and raped in the gang, forced to have sex. But the impact started to make some of these people who look just like kids that could be my children. And they just decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. But one of them didn't think he could get out of the gang, so he ran away to Manchester. And it was a few years later that I saw him in Kent, and he was with his girlfriend, and he said after that talk he ran away, ran to Manchester, stayed with some relatives and went to college and got an education. So the impact of it, and we took some of those gang members to a music studio in London, and there was 2 of them who got taken on by the studio, Jetstar Studio. That one was able to mix music and one was able to rap, and and they were very impressed with the talent of these young guys, and they took them on. So it had a massive impact, and I continued that relationship with them, and I got through money raised, we were able to raise money to buy them a football kit, and we got them to play the local police football, and it broke down barriers, and because they thought it was an opportunity to fight the police, and they didn't know how to play as a team, whereas the police did. So initially they were winning 1-0, but because the police, even the goalkeeper wanted to be a striker on the gang, but because the police played as a team, they were able to win 3-1, So that's what that was like. But Refocused has been working, excuse me, in schools. And initially I worked for nothing until I could raise money to pay for travel and things like that. But I worked in schools, in the community, and doing outreach. I worked with gangs, just initially sharing my story, telling kids about the consequences and that. But then I also got a lot of training. I was trained by a drug and alcohol service how to share my story and talk about the effects of drugs. I had lots of, I did a manager's course with the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. I've done a master's certificate with them. So over the years, I've had to do a lot of training to do what I do and practice good practice, to be professional when I go and talk to kids and parents. But I've worked, initially I was working all over Kent and Southeast London. And then what happened was the demand got so much that people were asking me for help outside. So I started going all over the country. Excuse me, got a tickly throat.
Yeah. Obviously your book as well, Breaking Better, is something which, people pick up, and I think it's one of those books you describe as a book you pick up but you can't put down.
Yeah, I've heard that.
From your perspective, how therapeutic was it to sit down and write your life story?
Well, I had to have a lot of help first. I had therapeutic help, a lot of it in the UK, but I also had some in America by some specialists who specialize in that. And as a result of all the help I've had, it made it easier to write the book. My son's in prison. He's got about 7 years left of a 22-year life stretch. And he said he tried to write his own book because he's trying to be like me now, but he said he couldn't do it. He could only do so much. He said it brought up so much stuff and he didn't know how to deal with it. There was just, because he hasn't had the help, there was it just tormented him even more, reminiscing. So I think the help I had prepared me to be able to speak about any aspect of my life without it having the effect like it's had for my son. And so it's very therapeutic. I love sharing about my story, especially helping others, using it to help others. So I've gone and spoke at conferences where the victims are all have all been sexually abused and raped, as children or adults. And when I listen to them, I see that they've still got this little black box that we all keep in the recesses of our minds that, has got all our secrets of our abuse. And so a lot of them have still got that. A lot of them have still got a long way to get to the stage where I believe I am, So I loved it. It was a man who runs the Don Hanson Charitable Foundation, who heard me speaking on LBC radio and decided to fund me writing the book, which took about 8 months. It was great. It was very difficult writing it because it took you back in a way that it was like I was there at each bit, I relived it. And if I hadn't had the help therapeutically to be able to speak, because I clammed up for years over my abuse, and I couldn't even have girls sometimes when I was younger touch me, because any affection from anyone would make me sort of shut down. So I've come a long way to be able to talk openly and be so vulnerable in the book. That's what I am. I've been vulnerable and put myself out there,
Yeah,
So,
no, of course you have. I mean, you're married to, is it Barley, well, who's the co-founder of Refocused, and I guess as well, it must be an immensely proud thing to have a daughter who, at the time of the article that I read, was becoming a legal secretary for a law firm in London. So
yeah, that's right.
I think that in itself is something which you must be immensely proud of, that you have a child who has gone on the right side of the tracks and developed and become something so important in that line of work.
Yeah, I'm very proud. She's doing really well. I was surprised she wanted to do law, but yeah. So and she's happy, yeah. And to be able to have a relationship with her, because kids often ask me, what's the worst crime you ever committed? And I say to them, the worst crime I've committed was I wasn't there for my son or my daughter, and it really kind of makes them, it really gets them, when you say that, because often some of the kids that ask that question have only got one parent in their life, or, they haven't got a good relationship with those that are their parents, and so it really gets to them. But yeah, it was my daughter, she is pleased that I've been able to turn my life around and be able to write this book as well. Her mother's not so pleased, because she even she didn't want anything about her in the book, but so she wasn't so pleased initially, but she understands.
I guess I want to finish this with the rather tragic news that we've been experiencing in the Northeast over the last few days, and that is the death of 15-year-old Holly Newton, murdered in Hexham, which is a leafy suburb outside of Newcastle, and a 16-year-old boy has now been charged with the murder. Now, for me, knife crime is something which, I will never understand. And, I don't understand the need for anyone, never mind children. And that's what these two people are and were, children, carrying knives. And what we have there, Lennox, is very simple. We have 2 young lives destroyed, one forever, in the sense that one poor girl's dead. We've got a young boy who now will know nothing but the inside of a cell. But we've also got the knock-on effect that has for the immediate family, and of course the community. And if anybody is qualified to be able to say to maybe as a youngster who stumbles across this video and this interview with yourself, if anybody's qualified to be able to give advice to somebody who's thinking about going out for a night out on the streets of their local area and putting a knife in their pocket, or going out and committing some kind of crime which is just going to affect other people, what would you say to any youngster watching from your advice, having been on the other side of the tracks?
Well, if you carry a knife, first of all, my condolences to the beautiful girl's family, and how devastating it is for them, and it's always so sad and tragic to hear when a young person loses their life. My son stabbed an 18-year-old boy 9 times. He lost his life. What I say to the kids is, if you choose to carry a knife, it's going to get used. You're going to use it. People are carrying knives because they're scared. They think it will protect them. It doesn't always protect them, but I think that they're not afraid of the consequences as well. So I wouldn't encourage any young person to carry a knife. I think that kids, they will want to stab you or hurt you over petty things, and I'm seeing that with young adults, that their arguments are so petty, and if they had a weapon on them, they would take it out and use them. I went to Surrey to talk to 6, 7 and 8-year-olds because an 8-year-old brought a knife into school to stab his classmate. It's the world we live in at the moment. We as society have created this environment where it's almost acceptable with the younger generation, to have some sort of weapon. But I discourage young people from it because of the consequences, that it will lead to prison, hospital, or someone's graveside. And I teach conflict resolution. I don't teach about sort of knife crime so much, but the conflict. And I notice with some young people, it's and part of an initiation with some gangs, or it's just some petty argument why a young person has picked up a knife and has stabbed someone else. And I've got solutions, but what do you say to young people? Well, it's very difficult because some of the circumstances they're in, being bullied, or they feel that what someone has said to them, you know, that they're going to do something about it, and sadly they choose to pick up a knife because they think it will stop the other person. And so that's why I like to get into finding out, you know, from young people, what makes you angry enough that you want to pick up a knife? Why don't you use your hands or whatever? But I think we've just created a society where we're not doing enough to stop our children from being so violent and crazy. I did it because I was getting a lot of abuse and crap from people, and I didn't, other than fighting, I didn't know another way. And I felt that if I, you know, because I was told that everyone's carrying a knife now, and other young people today are told the same thing. But I can't see why a 16-year-old boy would want to need to stab a young girl. It doesn't make sense, you know. And so there's obviously lots of issues going on. I don't know the circumstances for that, but it's not right. A young boy of that age, if he wanted to be violent to such a girl, he wouldn't need a knife to do it. So for me, what I'm hearing from you about this young girl is a senseless killing, really.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she used to be his boyfriend and they had a relationship and it broke up. And, you know, because I know the pain of love can make a person want to, if I can't have you, no one else with, you know, if that happens with a kid, you know, they can do some crazy stuff. But I have been able to help a lot of children turn away from wanting to use a knife through my sessions. I teach about it, and I share not just my lived experiences, but lived experiences from parents and from other children, you know, and the whole session itself, it is quite powerful and engaging. And, you know, I've seen young people change their thinking and then change their behavior. But I think what's happened to this girl is a senseless killing, you know, and it wasn't necessary for someone, a boy of that age, to dish out that kind of violence on a defenseless girl. I think it was senseless. And
yeah,
for him, he's going to grow up in prison. He's going to grow up in prison. You know, for that, it's a waste of life. You know, I may come across him because I still work in prisons and stuff. You know, but yeah.
I think it's just the way of the world, Lennox. Sadly, you know, you mentioned briefly earlier, you know, county lines about kids being, you know, forced into, you know, dealing drugs, and again, it's just this horrendous.
Yeah,
world.
they have to carry knives to protect the drugs. You know, if you're going to be in a county line gang, you're going to use a knife to protect the drugs, and to protect yourself from other gangs that will rob you. But what's happened to this girl, I mean, it's devastating. There's just no need for it. A life has been taken away senseless. You know, my son was told, are you going to let it, because he was dealing drugs for a drug dealer, are you going to let everyone take my drugs? And him and the drug dealer went and stabbed this boy. But you know, I tell kids that, you know, there's a possibility that a knife will get used on you if you use a knife. but I tell them about the consequences. Just for having a knife on you, you can get, 6 months in prison, 4 years if you're sort of 18 and over. But I tell them, I show them stuff about the dangers of carrying a knife. I try not to sound like a hypocrite because I was a criminal and I carried a knife, but I use those experiences of why I carried a knife and how to make other choices. Instead of carrying a knife, what else I could do if I get into various situations. So I help them find solutions and alternative ways to deal with, any hassle or whatever they're going through. But knife crime is not the way.
Lennox, it's been a fascinating hour speaking to you. Please, people out there, go onto Amazon. Make sure you get a copy of Breaking Better by Lennox Rodgers. It's a fantastic read, and one which I think you'll find very enlightening and inspirational. Anything you want to say, Lennox, before we finish today?
Really, I'm still working hard. The sales of the book, it helps us to help other people turn their life around, get training and therapeutic help. But, I'm still working hard to fight against knife crime, and I'm rescuing a lot of kids from gangs. And I think that a lot needs to change. I work in the children's prison sometimes, and a lot needs to change to help turn these kids around. I think we can do it, but it's going to take all of us working together to do it, to help these kids make better choices. And we need to, as adults, to try and create a better society for them to live in, thank you for having me on. Thank you for this privilege to meet you. I've seen the film Rise of the Foot Soldier, and
I didn't come off too well in that one, mind.
Yeah. So, but it reminds me of some of the organized crime gang, and the drug dealing gang. But yeah.
Well, Lennox, for me, it's been an honor to speak to you, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up the next time I'm in London. If anybody wants to find out more about the Refocused project, I've stuck the email address up there just underneath me. Yeah. It's www.refocusedproject.org.uk. It's a great website, well worth having a look. You can donate on there as well. A lot of these organizations, I'm afraid, do not run on fresh air. They do need donations, they do need help, and like everybody, this particular organization is doing so much good for the community, and Lennox is leading that. So please get yourself onto the website, refocusedproject.org.uk, and make sure you check in with Lennox if you're down in London. But Lennox, keep up the good work. If I can ever help.
Yeah, you might see me up your neck of the woods one day. I literally go anywhere. We've raised some money to cover travel. If people want me to come to schools or do some outreach with some youth workers in the community, I'll come.
And we've got people up here, I think, there's people who need direction. There's former criminals who potentially could help spread the word. So we'll keep in touch. We're linked up now, mate, which is great. And don't be afraid to shout out if you need any help or you need something, promoting and for me to help raise awareness, mate. But Lennox, been a pleasure, mate.
Fantastic.
Keep up the great work, and thanks very much for taking the time to come on.
All right, thank you. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Cheers. Mate. Bye-bye.
Bye.
A big thank you to all our sponsors, as always. Thanks to Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, and our website skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free, and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to Garden of Healing Dispensaries, CBD hemp and cannabinoid specialists. You can find them at thegohd.com. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, which are handmade in Cumbria. And you can find them at mrvickys.co.uk. If you want to make an order, give them a call on 01768 210 102 or email info@mrvickys.co.uk. Thanks to Blowhole Breweries, you can get a selection of beers, and the cans are in the design of the old Newcastle United entertainers strips. Blowholebrewery.co.uk. Thanks to Melly's Carpets and Beds, laying our reputation, one recommendation at a time. The best quality around at the cheapest prices. Melly's Beds and Carpets.co.uk. Email sales@mellysbedsandcarpets.co.uk or give Melly a call on 01670 632 216. And thanks to United Group Travel Limited, UK Coach Holidays in Morpeth, 01670 362 460 or mobile 07957 141 654. Graham, your driver, Beverly answering your calls and looking after you on your tour. Some great deals coming up there. Get yourself onto the website to check them out. Thanks also to Media Arts, who do all of our videos and help us with the technological side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. If you want to subscribe to the channel, then hit the subscribe button below. Hit the thumb up, which is the like button, which does us a big favour with the algorithm. And click share. Share it to Newcastle United, Facebook groups or Twitter accounts or your own social media to help our community grow. And if you want to join the channel, hit the join button. And for as little as $1.99 a month, you can get some members-only videos and chances to win some fantastic prizes. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest. Don't forget as well that we do events through NUFC Matters. And this one is the next event coming up, Friday the 24th of February, an evening with Newcastle United legend Steve Howie. Friday the 24th of February, Tyneside Irish Centre, and tickets are available at £50 from newcastlelegends.com. If you also go onto Voucher and search for the event, you can pick up a bargain on there. Don't forget, we also support the food bank on this channel. www.nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk is where you can find the Matchday Bucket. You can make a virtual donation to the Matchday Bucket 365 days of the year to keep helping the food bank in Newcastle.